Hello, and welcome to Red Rock Relationships, a podcast about communication. Let's unpack the relationships that we encounter in our daily lives and learn about what makes them tick. And now your host for Red Rock Relationships, Dr. James B. Stein.
All right. We are back once again. And if you follow us on social media, you will know that this is not our normal time. And in fact, it's quite early for me to be pontificating in the way that I normally do. But we're doing it because we had some scheduling issues. And so we will hopefully resume regularity in the next week or two here. But for now, we're on early, we're on often, and it's great to be here. And I am joined today by the very first guest that this show has ever had that I don't have a personal friendship with, but let's see if we can change that after today's episode. So it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Harry Weger. Thanks so much for joining the show.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me.
Anytime. And I'll tell you, the way that I found you is because I needed an expert for our topic today. And so I just Googled the topic and you were the first person who came up. So hopefully Google sent me in the right direction. I have a feeling that we're going to be doing just fine.
Gotta love those algorithms.
Absolutely. So today we are going to be talking yet again about the systems and the networks and the individuals who have the potential not only to influence our more traditionally close relationships, but of course represent very much close relationships within themselves. Today we are talking about Platonic relationships. So I'm very, very excited to talk about this because it's an area that I have not studied anywhere near enough and that I want to know more about. And so I'm hoping that we can learn some more about it today. Like always, I enjoy starting by learning about our guests. So maybe if you could speak a bit about, your area of interest, how you came upon it, where you're from, what you're up to now.
Yeah, sure. I got my PhD in communication back in the late 90s from the University of Arizona. And initially, my areas of interest mostly revolved around things like argumentation and conflict in close relationships. And I got some jobs and some graduate students. And like a lot of us, our graduate students come up with ideas that we wouldn't have come up with on our own. And so that's how I ended up studying cross-sex friendships. I had a student who was interested in cross-sex friendships because she had been in a relationship with someone and then they broke up and now they're just friends. And so she wanted to know more about that. So we started doing some research in that area. And then another student wanted to study friends with benefits. So we did that. And that's sort of how I ended up here. I do have sort of another sideline interest, and that's studying nonverbal behavior in televised political debates. And so I have a book, and that's what the book's about with my buddy John Sider.
Oh boy, you must have had such an interesting last 6 years.
It's been fun, that's for sure. Yeah, and then seeing the debates in 16 and 20, that really changed some things. But
I believe it. I absolutely believe it. So just to summarize, you're from the wrong Arizona University.
Well, a lot of the people I went to school with were your professors over there in Tempe.
I was about to ask, are you a Burgoon student?
Judy was on my dissertation committee, and I took classes from Michael, of course. But I was my advisor was Scott Jacobs, and but I was really good friends with Laura Guerrero. Her husband was the shortstop on our softball team. He was awesome.
Of course he was.
And Corey and I think we graduated the same year.
Wow.
Something like that. So, and then Art Ramirez used to be at ASU. He's a buddy of mine too.
That name I'm actually not familiar with, but everything else you said makes perfect sense. So,
Dan Canary. Dan Canary was there for a long time. He was my master's advisor.
So just to catch up the listeners who have no idea what we're talking about, Judy Burgoon is one of, if not the most published communication scholars of all time, as is Dan Canary. And they both have very close relationships with both the U of A and Arizona State University. They advised former guests on the show, including doctors Laura Guerrero and Corey Floyd. And so, of course, now we are continuing that lineage. It's funny how everything comes together in the field of interpersonal communication.
It's a small world, that's for sure.
It seems to be. It seems to be. So let's talk a little bit about platonics. First thing I want to get on is, and this is something I struggle with in my classes when I'm teaching interpersonal communication, both at the lower and upper division level. I'm wondering, can you give me like a clear and concrete definition of what it means to be in a platonic relationship? And then from there, I'm going to kind of try and pick it apart and see what is and what isn't platonic.
Yeah, technically, strictly speaking, a platonic relationship is one in which people experience a close emotional connection and attachment, but have no interest in forming a romantic or sexual relationship.
Okay, that's nice. I like simplicity. So we are talking about straight up friendship. Now, what about a situation in which like one person has a crush on another person and then the other person is not returning those feelings? So unrequited love. Can those two people truly be in a platonic relationship if one of them is desiring something more?
Well, I mean, strictly speaking, it's not a platonic relationship on the side of the person who has the crush, but they can certainly maintain a friendship that is not burdened by any kind of sexual or romantic attraction, either one by the person who has the crush keeping their mouth shut and not ever saying anything about it, or by, probably a way those of us who study interpersonal communication would rather see people do it, and that is have a discussion and just say, I have these feelings, but that doesn't mean we have to act on them.
Okay, so there you can explicitly state that there is that sort of tension there, or you can ignore it, and in both cases, you can maintain a platonic relationship in theory. In practice, it might be a little bit more stressful than that.
Yeah, and both Laura and I have conducted research looking at what happens when somebody has a romantic attraction to their purported platonic friend, and the results are there's both good and bad things that come out of that. But one of the main ways cross-sex friendships end is when one person confesses their love for the other, and then it creates, discomfort and awkwardness between the two of them. So, sometimes maybe, if you really value the friendship, maybe you don't want to necessarily disclose that you have those feelings, but it's not uncommon for people to have those kind of feelings when if you're a heterosexual person and you're friends with someone who's attractive to you. It's not unusual for people to experience those feelings, at least at some point during the friendship.
Yeah, and so I think a big thing to kind of unpack here is not just the romantic issue here, because like we think about the friend zone, which is actually going to be the topic of our discussion next week. So I'm very excited for that conversation. But that one I feel like is the very traditional, like one person is into the other person and then the other person isn't really into them back, and you just kind of go from there. But I'm a little bit more interested, and maybe this is because it's related to my own research, I'm a little bit interested in the sex component, where you may have one individual having, certain thoughts about a platonic friend. And I haven't done a whole lot of research on this, but I know that it is quite common in heterosexual cross-sex relationships to have thoughts, right, about a friend. So,
sure.
So my question is how, and I know we're going a little off script here, but now I'm just interested. So my question is, when you have a platonic friendship like that, how can we manage those perfectly normal, perfectly natural, and very common thoughts that may not necessarily manifest in any feelings or actions, but they're there? Like I think about, for example, you have an awkward sex dream about a cross-sex friend. How do we manage a day like that where we wake up after a dream?
Well, I guess it depends on how close the friendship is, on whether or not you disclose that to the other person, because it might be just, a funny conversation to have, right? And it depends a little bit too on the context of the friendship. Are both of you taken? So sometimes we have a cross-sex friend and we're involved in a committed relationship. And if we're both in a committed relationship, it might not be as threatening to talk about that kind of thing. And plus the amount of detail you could go into, right? So you could just say, I had a crazy dream last night where, we were in bed together, and then I woke up and I thought, oh no, where did that come from? Right.
Yeah.
But, getting into the details, that might cause
Right.
more problems. But, just recognizing that this is just a super normal experience, and, having the ability to say, well, that's just a feeling everybody has, and it's totally natural, but I'm not going to act on it because, whatever the reason is why you don't want to act on it.
Yeah, so maybe you're both taken. Maybe you value the friendship more. But I think that the way that you worded it was eloquent, and it was. I think I don't know if you did it on purpose, but you talked about the dream, right? And then you said, I don't know how that happened, right? So I think framing that discussion in terms of this was an accident. I don't really want this. I don't know what's going on. How crazy is this? Right? I think maybe that act of hedging allows us to have the conversation in a more comfortable environment, and so. Yeah, maybe. This is all sort of building up to a question that I ask my students repeatedly and that I ask myself repeatedly, to be honest. If we're, and it's clear that in this episode we are living in the world of heteronormativity, right? It's just a little easier to talk about cross-sex friendships in heterosexual friendships. And so if we're staying in that realm, my next question is, in your expert opinion, do you really think it is possible for a guy and a gal to be just friends and nothing more? And if so, what benefits do these just friends couples incur by maintaining a fully platonic relationship?
Well, I can talk about the motivations people have for entering cross-sex friendships, and so we'll have to discard the one that is maybe the most popular for men, which is hoping for sexual access at some point. But if you disregard that particular motivation, men tend to identify the female friend as a source of sensitive and empathic support, because a lot of men, for whatever reason, maybe feel uncomfortable talking about their insecurities or something that happened with another man. And plus men in general give less sensitive support than females do. And so if you're looking for someone who will cry with you or something, you might feel like, well, a female is more likely to give me more sensitive support.
Right.
And for women, they tend to be motivated for two reasons. One is to get inside information about men. So there might be another man they're interested in, and they might want to know, well, he said this, or he's doing that. Does that mean anything? Trying to get inside information from another man. And then the other is that men tend to engage in more instrumental type activities in managing their friendships. So while it might be satisfying sometimes to spend most of your time talking about your relationships and that sort of thing with females also like to do things like shoot pool and play darts and go to a football game or something like that. And so they see men as being more willing to engage in those sort of activities. And so kind of rounds out your experience with friendships by having a friendship of the opposite sex.
Very interesting. You said so much there. First of all, you alluded a little bit to what are known as back burner relationships, and I love back burner relationships. That makes me think I need to get Dibble on this show. He's the foremost expert on that, and so we're gonna have to do an episode on back burners. But I think the idea of kind of rounding out the friendship, right? Because we know that from a communication standpoint, men and women are really similar. There are some small differences, and one of those small differences is that when men hang out, it's a little bit more activity oriented. When women hang out, it's a little bit more communication oriented. And so there you go. There are some great benefits. Now let me ask you this: are there any drawbacks to having these cross-sex platonic relationships?
Yeah, there's a few. I'm trying to remember. I think it was Mansour talked about 4 challenges of cross-sex friendships, and so there are challenges to those. And one of is something we already talked a little bit about, which is the potential for romantic and sexual feelings to come up, which can complicate the friendship. But there are some others too. For example, trying to present the friendship to other people in your social network is a little bit of a challenge because of the heteronormative culture we live in. People expect male-female relationships to be of the romantic type. And so you're forever having to explain, no, we're just friends. No, we're just friends. Or they, oh, so I see you're here with your date tonight. No, we're just friends. And
Right.
when do you say that? Like, is it an insult to always be telling people, oh no, she's just my friend. She's not my romantic partner? Because then it's like, well, what's wrong? Why do you always have to clarify that? Right.
Right.
And then also, there's some discussion of whether or not in a patriarchal culture, males and females can be friends on equal footing. Although, even though it's possible, and that there is some research that shows that males tend to be more likely to be pressing sexual issues with their female friends. When you ask people in studies whether or not you feel like the relationship is equitable and equal, most people say it is. So while it's a potential problem, it's not really one that most people experience, I think.
Interesting. I'm really curious about those potential drawbacks, because I prefer kind of like approaching things from the dark side of interpersonal communication. So I would love a study on like when platonics go wrong, or like poisonous platonics. I like alliteration.
Yeah, it's always good for an article title too.
Sure. Okay, so big question here, because we're going to be talking about the friend zone. We have talked about friends with benefits on this show with Dr. Truscelli last season. A lot of folks who are listening to this are likely either in a situation where they may be pining for a platonic friend, or on the other hand, they may have someone pining for them. And so is it, I don't want to use the word appropriate, I guess, is it reasonable to try and turn your relationship, your platonic relationship, into something more? Like, is there like a love potion formula that people can use to help escalate a platonic relationship into something like a romantic or perhaps a sexual relationship, if that's what they're hoping to do?
Yeah, sure. I mean, a lot of people enter cross-sex friendships because they have some romantic interest in the other person, and they're hoping that some opportunity will arise. And one of the things that both Laura and I have found is that relationship maintenance behaviors, when you're attracted to a cross-sex friend, people tend to up the amount of maintenance they do. And so our cross-sex friendships are usually maintained. We probably spend less energy on our cross-sex friendships than any other relationship we have that's a close relationship. And so when you feel romantically involved, you engage in more things, like you contact the other person more, you offer more support, you spend more time talking about your relationship, you spend less time talking about other people that you might be attracted to, because you don't want the other person to think that you're unavailable or disinterested. And then Valerie Akbalet and I, based on her thesis, were interested in what sorts of relationship issues, behavioral issues, things like that would make someone consider escalating a platonic friendship to a cross-sex friendship, to a romantic relationship, or to a friends with benefits relationship. And for friends with benefits relationship, the most important thing is to be attractive.
Yeah.
For both males and females, physical attractiveness was by far swamped every other element, but also having a close friendship, and then having support of your friendship circle in terms of whether or not your friends would approve of this relationship. And one of the things that I thought was interesting was, for males, it didn't matter if the other person was involved with somebody else.
Ouch.
They would, but for females it was. So
right.
If you've got a girlfriend, you might want to keep it quiet if you want your cross-sex friend to be interested in you.
Okay, that's fair. And I think the research bores that out. If I'm not mistaken, men are much more likely to engage in sexual infidelity. Women are more likely to engage in emotional infidelity. And so those components kind of come up when it's like, am I going to cheat on my partner with my friend? Maybe no, maybe yes. And there might be a bit of a sex difference there.
Yeah, and the other thing is that females tend to be sexual gatekeepers anyway. And that's especially true in cross-sex friendships. Males are much more likely to be attracted or to say, yeah, sure, if she wanted to have sex, I'd have sex with her, than females are in the other direction. And so it's probably much easier for a female to try to escalate to a sexual relationship anyway, than it is for males, because there has to be mutual attraction for that.
Right, of course. This makes me think about the literature on secret tests. And for those who don't know, secret tests they're exactly what they sound like. If we are interested in someone, or perhaps if we're already in a relationship, which was the original study, what we'll do is we will sometimes unconsciously test our partner to see how they feel about us. And so I'm thinking about a platonic relationship in which one person describes a dream, maybe even a dream that didn't really happen, to their platonic friend, just to see how this friend would react to the idea of them ending up in bed together. Has there been any secret test literature on platonic friends?
I haven't read any.
Oh man,
I've
we
read
need that.
pretty much most of them, but what we do see is that in attempts to escalate, it's not unusual for people to use indirect strategies of exactly that sort of thing. But I don't think the study I'm thinking of wasn't couched in secret tests, but more like indirect strategies. So one of the things about joking, flirting is that it's deniable. So, you can flirt a little bit, and then if the person says, "Oh, Harry, I don't think about you that way," you can always save face by just saying, "Oh, I was just joking. What do you? Come on, now we're just friends. I thought you'd understand. I was just joking, right?" So you can mitigate the possibility of losing face.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And one of the other branches of my research is friends with benefits studies, and I think I'm going to have to talk to my old advisor, Dr. Monjo, about a secret test piece on platonics and FWBRs. I think that there's room there for something. And, people have been testing and retesting that idea for a while now, and I think it's time for another one. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think there's anything interesting to find there?
Yeah, I definitely, the study that my grad student, Melissa, and I got published, we had dyads instead of just one individual in the friendship. And so we asked them to talk about their feelings about the relationship. Was it strictly platonic? And then we asked them, one category was, I'm attracted to the other person, but the other person isn't attracted to me. And we found that like 10% of our participants, both people said they're attracted to the other person, but the other person is not attracted to me.
Wow.
And, of course, we couldn't tell them because we couldn't go back and say, hey, by the way,
shoot your shot, do it,
right?
It'll work. Yeah.
Wow. So, I mean, there's got to be people have got to be engaging in those kinds of secret tests, testing the waters.
Wow, that is really interesting. It makes me wonder if that is like a confidence thing. Like, am I just not confident to ask my friend out? Or if perhaps maybe they even they want to believe that the other person isn't attracted to them because they're so nervous about ruining the friendship that, they say, well, if I compartmentalize this as I like them and they don't like me, then it can always be a pipe dream and I can still have the friendship and I don't have to take that leap of faith, which is, of course, in the times of the pandemic, friendships are a little hard to come by. So we may be searching for those or trying to maintain those with a little bit more veracity than we normally would.
Yeah, and part of it can be just a misperception too, because it's not uncommon for people to think that another person is not interested in them and miss signals that are obvious, because they start off with the belief, oh, well, we've already have this established platonic relationship. So even when the other person does flirt with you, you might misperceive it as being, oh, they're just joking because we've been friends for a long time.
Right. Yeah. And that's very interesting. I think that's a great note to end on, because next time we're going to be talking about the friend zone. And then the time after that, we're going to start getting into some more dark side stuff. We're going to talk about toxic relationships. We're going to talk about relational transgressions and all of that stuff that hurt the relationship and all of that stuff that I find the most fascinating. So I really want to thank you again, Dr. Harry Weger, for coming on the show and educating us a little bit about these really important relationships.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. I'm going to have to tune into some of those other topics you've got going. It sounds interesting.
I hope you do. One audience member at a time. We'll be back next week for a talk about the friend zone. Looking forward to seeing you then.
You've been listening to Red Rock Relationships, a podcast about communication. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time. If you'd like to be on the show or have questions for us, please send us an email to redrockrelationships@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Just search Red Rock Relationships. Thank you again. And remember, it all begins with good communication. This has been a production from a podcast studio.